What's up, everyone? Today I will be discussing the black male virgin trope. I wanted to focus on this particularly because I think that often black men, similar to black women, are depicted as hypersexual beings. In this trope, you see a rare instance questioning what it means to be masculine. Gender is an important factor in understanding attitudes towards sexual intercourse, as well as someone's upbringing and their socialization process. And so, again, today I'm going to be focusing on 3 movie examples, including the Inkwell, Boyz in the Hood, and the movie The Wood. Drew is basically a shy 16-year-old who is recovering from this traumatic burning of his home. He also happens to be very timid and typically just a carefree black boy. In the movie, it's shown that his family basically goes to this upper middle class beach town in Virginia to visit their relatives towards the summer. I think that that's pretty normal to a lot of people traveling. For Drew, it happened to be kind of like a getaway. There, Drew happened to meet up with his cousin at the time, who's basically outgoing, and he's chasing girls. And of course, he's bringing him along, and he wants to also let his friends know that his cousin isn't as weird as he appears to be. Drew doesn't seem very interested in impressing anyone. He just wants to have a good time and kind of let his imagination and curiosity lead him around. Drew first places his eyes on Lauren, who's practicing yoga or ballet or some type of dance on the beach, and she's by herself. And at that time, he sees Lauren in her natural state. She's not trying to impress anybody, and she just seems like she's at peace. And I think that it reflected to him that maybe she was this peaceful person. He doesn't know her reputation in town as being the it girl, as being kind of stuck up and hard to get. And he kind of doesn't care. He just, though he's shy, he wants what he wants. There's obviously things going on in town. For instance, Mr. and Mrs. Lee, they appear to be this great couple. And Mr. Lee has I guess some type of executive job, but he is cheating on his wife. Drew, who happens to be nosy and is very struck by him cheating, very upset that Mr. Lee is cheating. And he tries to avoid it, but somehow he gets stuck in grown folks' business, and I'll come back to that later. Again, he's this carefree child, teenager, what have you. And he often rides his bike around and kind of just escapes everything that's going on. And he carries this knitted bear that his grandmother made him. And it's this comfort stuffed animal. And to his father, who's this former Black Panther, he thinks it's strange. He worries that his son isn't, I guess, a man's man. And he wants him to have friends and pretty much date girls. But Drew kind of just lives life on the whim. And I think his grandmother had a lot of impact on him, which he kind of confides in this Black counselor who has a good relationship with him while on the beach. And, she really tries to help him heal from a lot of the trauma he's going through. Aside from that, Drew's parents, they really aren't on good terms. Even though they've been married for a while, it seems like the kindle has burned in their relationship. While on the beach, even though for a short time, things happen where they tend to reconcile their marriage, and Drew happens to bump into Lauren, or Lauren rather bumps into him when he's talking to Mrs. Lee randomly. And obviously her boyfriend, who was the it guy, quote unquote, he's a serial cheater, and he kind of pushes Lauren to the curb, or she dumps him. I can't really remember. But either way, they break up, and Lauren sees him on the bike. And so she pretty much, to me, my interpretation is that she wanted to use him to get her ex's attention. But at the time, Drew doesn't really notice it. He's just happy that Lauren is giving him attention. And so they have this short summer romance where it's not really intimate as in a lustful way, but it's really them kind of confiding in each other typical teenagers, and being by the fire and just doing silly things in the country that people do. Drew sees that Lauren is really beautiful. Again, he just wants to know who she is, beyond her beauty. And Lauren, she kind of confides that she has this troubled family background. And when I was watching this movie, I thought about Jenny and Forrest Gump. I'm not saying that Lauren had the same background, but she was basically there was sexual intercourse at a young age. Y'all gonna have to read in between the lines because y'all know these guidelines on this platform are strict. Lauren being open to that and constantly used for her body, she kind of relies on her body or her beauty. So Lauren becomes numb to that. And so it seems like she feels that all she has to offer is her body. So even though she values Drew's friendship, she does quite end back up into the graces of her ex-boyfriend. And so basically her and Drew, they planned a date on the 4th of July. There's this town parade and they're supposed to go on a date, and he's supposed to pick her up on his bike. And when he goes there, he sees that Lauren is about to pretty much sleep with her ex, and he's heartbroken because it seems like this is the first girl he ever liked. So he basically runs through the town and onto the beach, and he sees Mrs. Lee there, who's also heartbroken from her husband. And this scene really bothered me because I thought that perhaps Mrs. Lee would just comfort him, maybe give him a hug or listen to him, but she takes advantage of him. And yeah, Black Hollywood disappointed me in this scene. Ironically, Drew goes back home and it's like early in the morning. So people kind of already insinuated, yeah, you was doing something you weren't supposed to do. Well, his mother was, but his father's just like, finally, this boy got him, And his cousin is just like, who was it? Because, this his town and he wants to know, and he's nosy and he's proud. But that kind of confirmed the solidity of his masculinity was him sleeping with someone. Unfortunately, it was a very inappropriate relationship. And I also was thinking when I saw this, again, how there's so much pressure around like losing the virginity. Once he did, quote unquote, lose his virginity, it was so taboo and basically illegal that he couldn't even talk about it. And honestly, the way Drew's character was, I don't think if it was Lauren or someone else that he would have spoke about it either. But it was just like this idea that every girl or woman he opened up to, which happened to just be two people, but still, they took advantage of him. So Lauren took advantage of him emotionally, and Mrs. Lee took advantage of him emotionally and physically. The next movie I'm going to talk about is Trey and Boyz in the Hood. I'd argue that Trey was pretty level-headed compared to his peers. He did have a father in his life, similar to the previous movie. And his father, just like Drew's father, basically told him about sex and life through a fishing moment. I think this scene is very popular when Trey is very young. And before he's like even in puberty, his father, like they go out fishing and he talks to him about all these like cultural issues. And one thing he lets him know is that, sex isn't something that you play around with, and you have to be responsible with who you have sex with. Just don't basically end up having a child out of wedlock, having a child at a young age. And I think that I want to say he was a single father for the most part because he did take Trey in, but I do feel like they had a level of co-parenting. My particular point is his father had Trey at such a young age that he understood how troubling it would be to raise a child at such a young age. And it seemed like he really was investing in his son to go to school and just pretty much be a better person than he was. Trey seemed like he was like a lot of teenagers, socialized to impress his peers. His best friend Ricky had a child at a young age and he had a promising future. And, just in general, Trey obviously had hormones that bothered him because he was always pressing his girlfriend Brandy to sleep with him, or he was either lying to his father about like some sexual fantasy, which his father didn't appreciate. And so there's a study by Culture, Health, and Sexuality, and it found that more than 30% of Black male youth, young adults, report their first sexual encounter younger than age 13. And the responses were collected from 493 Black men between age 15 to 24 living in Baltimore, Maryland, as part of an existing youth serving program to promote healthy sexual development. Sex ed is primarily lacking in the United States. It has come to like this huge point where people just see sex as like something cool or this instant gratification. It's just not really taken seriously. And I think it's very important that these young teenagers, they have fathers who taught them the importance of, or who at least spoke to them about sex. Because I can't say Drew's father was like the most responsible, but I do think having some type of guide, at least to, give them some idea of sexual education, or rather than watching a video, if y'all know what I'm saying. So what's interesting about Trey is that Trey is constantly lying about having sex, and throughout the movie, he has these encounters with like the police or racism. We're just trying to survive in the hood. And he just goes to Brandy's house and he cries. I think that's maybe the only time in the film that he shows a level of vulnerability before, of course, Ricky passes away at the end. But in this instance, I feel like maybe Brandy felt that he was being honest for the first time. And then there's this like double innuendo of, oh, Black women can cure Black men from racism. Like, this underlying message I get. And I don't think sex can cure people from racism or everything. But in that moment, it's seen as an escape. And honestly, when I look back at these tropes and just Black TV in general, I feel like this is the only movie, aside from Just Another Girl in the IRT, where they actually let children or youth have sex, like a sex scene. Take with that what you will. But anyways, during that time, I feel like also that Brandy finally saw him as being honest and vulnerable, and maybe that opened up a space of intimacy. And I think that people overlook the aspect of just that vulnerability of him like crying and fighting the air, and people just kind of laughed it off. But at that time, he really was very frustrated with the things that was going on in like South Central LA. And so that maybe people just don't know how to respond to that, but that's what that was. It was just a lot of frustration. The next film I'm going to go to, The Wood. And so in The Woods, it depicted a group of Black men reflecting on their lives as like teenagers. And one of them being Taye Diggs, who was a player. They were getting ready for his marriage, and he ironically happened to have cold feet at the altar. So while they were living their teenage days, there's a scene where they go back to a bet on who could lose their virginity the fastest. I thought this was ironic because obviously objectifying women through sex isn't seen as something new. I feel like in the 90s and 2000s, there was this common trope off of like bets. Young guys in the film are like, who can lose their virginity the quickest? And I feel like historically, socially, whatever, that men are often encouraged to have sex and, just conquer as many women as possible. And it's really sad that that was being encouraged at even a young age, like in The Woods. And what is interesting is also that you can see in The Wood that there's this like double standard, girls told not to do that. And I think that's very cultural, where at least back then it wasn't really normal, or it was like taught that, don't have sex till you're married, at least in the South. And like, don't do this, don't do that. And you're going to be considered prude and you're going to ruin the family's image. But boys are really allowed to just run free. And so there's a scene where they are like talking it up to girls and just doing a bunch of things. And the girls are just like, they don't want to do that. And I think a lot of this has to do with like biblical teachings again, and the double standards that exist in society. So there's like a bit of internal conflict, because there are like scenes where the girls are like, they're enjoying the kissing or whatever foreplay. But when it comes to actually doing it, they're like, no, I'm not going to do that. That's nasty. And that was a consensus for like the entire scene. And of course, it seemed like eventually they slept with a girl, but it wasn't that easy to sleep with a young Black girl. And that's again because we've been often taught, or we were often taught, not to just sleep around. Ironically, though, just like I guess you could say with Brandy or a lot of teenagers, when parents aren't around, it ended up happening for Mike. About his characterization too, Mike, he was basically depicted as like this shy, timid guy from the South. And he didn't seem like a bad kid. It just seemed like, again, he always wanted to influence his friends. Of course, that's why he went along with the bet. He happened to sleep with Alicia when her parents weren't there, and they were supposed to study together. And it's just like this awkward scene of sex. And you can kind of insinuate that he was overwhelmed. I'll just say that. He is the first one to win the bet. But because he does value Alicia and doesn't want to like run her name, I guess, through the streets, as people would say, he lets his other friends believe they won the bet. And so they tend to still have a relationship that is possibly rekindled towards the end. But I just think it's interesting how Mike, he seemed like a decent kid. Trey seemed like a decent kid. And Drew seemed like a decent child. All of them kind of had like this sensitive or like goofy nature. They were like teenagers, basically. But I think this trope basically humanizes Black youth in a way, because I feel like a lot of times that when people look at Black teenagers, they try to equivalent them to men, at least in like this society in the United States. You know, they hypersexualize them, etc. Kind of reminds people that we all have these stages, and maybe some of us are still going through those stages of not knowing who we are and what sex is, or how do we impress our friends. And I really like the virgin trope again, because it's just refreshing to see that, of course, we are not all the same, and to see like characters at different development, and see like kind of maybe some type of story of people we knew or things we went through. So I like the Black virgin trope a lot. I think it's really important, again, that most of the characters in this trope had their father in their life, or they came from like some type of co-parenting, or they just seemed to have parents who really cared about them. So that's kind of all I have to say. What did you think about these movies? Have you seen these movies? I hope I didn't spoil it for y'all. And let me know your thoughts down below. These are my thoughts, and my thoughts are my own. Thank you for listening to Books and Looks TV. I'll see y'all next time.